another episode of Take Charge. Today we have a front seat to talk with a national treasure, Henry M. Robert III. His grandfather created Robert's Rules of Order that many of us use today. So sit back and listen to a fascinating walk through history with Henry M. Robert III.
I am, again, Alfreda Robinson, the Associate Dean for Trial Advocacy and the Co-Director of the Litigation Program at the George Washington University Law School. We are delighted to co-sponsor this conversation with the National Association of Parliamentarians and the Supreme Court Historical Society. It is my pleasure to introduce Dean Morant. Dean Blake D. Morant is the Dean and the Robert Kramer Research Professor of Law at the George Washington University School of Law. He celebrated his 1-year anniversary, as our Dean 2 days ago on September 1st, 2015. Can we just give him a hand for a year? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Robinson, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the George Washington University Law School. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me and to represent the law school in saying that we are very pleased to host this event of the National Association of Parliamentarians to welcome Henry M. Robert III, PBS, C-SPAN, and also the Supreme Court Historical Society, which to this wonderful event. I want to tell you, as you've heard, as Dean of the Law School, I have to conduct many meetings, and also as President of the Association of American Law Schools, I will conduct a number of meetings both for our executive committee as well as for the House of Representatives. It is interesting to note how salient Robert Rules of Orders have become for not only my organizations, but in organizations all over the country. I'm especially delighted to pay homage to Brigadier General Henry M. Robert, because I myself was a member of the U.S. Army JAG Corps, and he, as a member of the Corps of Engineers, symbolizes everything that is very professional in terms of not only what we should do as citizens, but also what we are to lend as a legacy to our country and to our duties. I was fascinated by the life of Brigadier General Roberts. His father, Reverend Joseph Thomas Robert, was a minister, and his family grew up in South Carolina, and he was a staunch abolitionist, and he didn't want to raise his family there, so he took them to Ohio. And his beliefs in the universality of education led him to become the first president of Morehouse College. That truly fascinated me because I almost went to Morehouse College and know about its quality and its history. After graduating fourth in his class at West Point, he had a decades-long, distinguished military career. He did so many things as a part of the Corps of Engineers, including doing the construction of defenses against the British in the Pig War of 1859. He also developed a number of different strategical maneuvers that helped the military in many of its operations in the late part of the 19th century and early part of the 20th century. But really, what really distinguishes General Roberts is that he went all over the country and noticed that there was no systematic set of rules that individuals could use to conduct meetings. He would conduct meetings and would ask for this, and he couldn't find it. And he had that ingenuity of spirit to decide there needs to be a codification of those rules, and he took it upon himself to do that. I don't know if he knew this or not, but his legacy now lives on in a very special way. I know of very few formal meetings that do not use Robert's Rules of Order in order to make sure that their meetings are conducted not only in a way that promotes the kind of democratic exchange that we want, but they are also done in such a way to be systematic and very effective. I noticed that Robert's Rules now age 139 years after its first printing. And indeed, his grandson who's with us today, Henry M. Robert III, carries on this fine tradition as one of the editors of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome you here for this auspicious occasion. And very often people look at lawyers and they say they have a certain way of dealing in business, but I want you to know that being a lawyer is a historic and honored profession where you're not only called to represent your clients, but you're also called to be true leaders. That's why the synergy between what you're doing now and what Robert's Rules of Order gives is such a salient part of being leaders. And I am indeed honored to have you here to be part of this legacy. So enjoy the remainder of your meeting. Thank you so much for gracing us. Thank you for inspiring me as I inspire law students to understand what true leadership means, and that having a knowledge of how to conduct meetings is a salient part of being a very good lawyer and a very good professional. Enjoy the remainder of your meeting.
Many of you already know about Robert's Rules as well as Mr. Robert, and he is most notable because his grandfather, Brigadier General Henry M. Robert, created Robert's Rules of Order. So we have the privilege of listening to him, and we're going to be taking a walk through history with you. Is that right, Mr. Robert?
Yes.
All right. Well, first of all, start sharing some of your thoughts about the significance of your great-grandfather, Joseph Thomas Robert.
Well, he was an educator, the first president of what's now Morehouse College. He was one of the pioneers in doing things for the education of black freedmen as Baptist ministers.
I mean, and it's like so powerful that you've said that. First president of Morehouse College, is that not correct?
That is correct. He was the first one. He wasn't one of the founders, but he was the first one to have the title of president.
That's what it takes, and we all know and love Morehouse. Share with us some of your memories about your father that he shared with you regarding his dad, Brigadier General Henry M. Robert.
The memories that he shared of his father, they're legion, but
how was he thought of? You know, when he spoke about him, was he, let's say, like an idol, or?
Well, I like to, at the risk of exaggerating, I like to exaggerate. The truth is, all right, my father was his father's only son. He had 3 sisters. My grandfather had 1 son, my father, and 3 daughters. And they were, actually, they thought their grandfather was God, their father was God. And they did their best to impress that view on me. But
wow.
I would say my father, if I wanted to make a joke, I would say my father didn't suffer from such illusions. He just thought his father had divine inspiration.
Wow. That's fascinating. So tell us a little bit about his career. Tell us about the career of your grandfather, Brigadier General Henry M. Robert.
Well, he graduated from West Point in the class of 1857. He invited to stay 1 year at West Point as an instructor.
Wow.
And then he was sent to the Northwest. When he was born in South Carolina, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Civil War broke out, he had his struggle to decide which side of the North or the South he would go on. And he came back across the continent all the way over. He couldn't make up his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And he had his night of walking the floor all night, just like Robert E. Lee.
Wow.
But his decision was different. His reasoning is recorded. Walking the floor in the room in the old Fifth Avenue Hotel in New York City, which I believe was located at the northwest corner of Madison Square in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just 23 years old.
Wow.
Well, now let's see, I've got to make a decision in Washington. I have to go with one, when I get there, I have to go with one side or the other.
Oh. Wow.
But there's several elements to the question.
Yes.
First question is, do I owe my allegiance to the primary allegiance to the federal union
Mm-hmm.
or to the state of South Carolina?
Right.
Answer: the state of South Carolina.
Mm.
Next question. Is it my duty to follow the present leadership of the state of South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
or to make my own judgment as to what is the best interest of the state of South Carolina and act accordingly?
Okay.
Answer: walking the floor for a while. It's my duty to follow what I think is the best interest of the state of South Carolina. Next question: does the state of South Carolina have the right to secede from the Union? Yes, it does. Next, last question: is it in the best interest of the state of South Carolina to secede from the Union?
Mm.
No. If the state of South Carolina should secede from the Union, and the other states could do the same thing, they could form the Confederacy. They could later quarrel among themselves and secede from the Confederacy, and the Confederacy could break up, and half the country, a major portion, would be back to the same square one that the country was under the Articles of Confederation before the U.S. Constitution was adopted. So he would stay with the go with the Union. And he went to Washington, walked in the War Department. There was a desk set up right inside the main entrance,
Yes.
where there was a young officer there of his acquaintance.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, here's what you want, Robert. Brigadier handed him a printed resignation form. He says, all you have to do is put your son. Excuse me. All you have to do is put your name at the top and sign at the bottom. He says, no, I come to report for assignment to duty.
Ah.
And the young officer at the desk was astounded and says, "Oh, what, you know, this is what you want, all your classmates are signing this." I beg your pardon. So we went with the Union, and all through his life he proudly wore a button that he belonged to the Loyal Order, the Military Order of the Loyal Legion, of those officers who had stayed with the war.
I don't know about all of you, but that gave me chills. How about you? I mean, that gives me chills. And it gave all of us chills. Because, you know, after 23 years old, walking here and making this monumental decision, and he made that decision. Oh, would you please continue, Mr. Robert?
Well,
So my next one is that, well, we're going to ask you a lot of questions. So, what did he do with the Union? What was his role there at the Union Army?
it was assigned, it was in the Corps of Engineers, of course.
Ah.
And he was assigned to construction of defenses of Washington.
Ah.
But when he had gone to, oh dear, when he had gone to the Northwest, the year after he graduated from West Point, he, going across Panama on the railroad, he contracted virulent malaria. And it dogged him for 10 years at least.
Wow.
So he found the duty of the defenses of Washington too strenuous.
Okay.
And then he was sent to Philadelphia, but that was still leaving us. So we wound up in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Ah.
And that is where he had the experience for which he's known, that got him into parliamentary law.
Ah, so what was that experience? What happened there in New Bedford?
Well, he was asked to preside over a meeting which is said to, was in the First Baptist Church at New Bedford. It was said to have run to the defense of the city in the case of a Confederate attack on the Secede.
Oh my.
And they thought well, of course, he was in charge of that as the Army engineer, and well, he's got to be smart. He went to West Point, a graduate of West Point. He must know about things like this, but he didn't.
Wow.
But he didn't dare say no. And well, that's his initial experience in parliamentary law. He made up his mind if he got out of there alive, he would learn something about it. But his idea of learning something about it, he found a page or two about a couple of rules about emotions.
Yes.
In some almanac.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote them on a slip of paper and carried it in his wallet and thought he'd be safe. He carried it for 4 years.
Oh my goodness.
But then he was promoted to major and sent to San Francisco as chief engineer.
Oh my goodness.
And there were
now I've read that meeting was pretty long in New Bedford. How long was
said to have run to 14 hours, but I don't know.
How many have been in a meeting for 14 hours? Oh, we have one.
I don't know, 14 hours, that's a lot. Oh my goodness. So he was inspired. He didn't run away from the situation, but he ran to solve this issue.
Yes. Well, he was dedicated Baptist lay churchman. And wherever he went, he was involved in specific activities as best he could, or as time allowed.
Right, right.
So San Francisco at that time was a turbulent place, kind of a wide open town.
Oh my goodness.
So he belonged to a half a dozen, he and his wife, he was married by that time. They tried to, they belonged to a half a dozen societies trying to better social conditions there.
Yes.
I've heard, for example, a thing that was, it was considered fair sport to set dogs on Chinese people
Oh my goodness.
for sport.
Ooh.
So there was that kind of
Ooh.
thing. So they, and then there was a Society for the Rescue of Fallen Women, later called the California Rescue Mission.
Really? Wow.
If I wanted to say, I wanted to be funny, I'd say dedicated to winning the women to move out of the house and into the home.
Ah, okay. That's a good way of placing it and saying that. When did you start writing the Roberts Rule of Order?
Well, that's a ahead of the story. But in San Francisco, he found, incidentally, the present edition. Here is Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, as I guess most of you must know. And in the introduction, this story that trying to tell you is better than I can do now. But anyway, it's actually hard in our present culture today. It's very hard to imagine the situation that
It is.
found there.
Yes.
People in San Francisco at that time had come there from every state in the Union, and they apparently had considered it very important to follow correct parliamentary procedure.
Okay.
But parliamentary procedure there was, as the people's ideas of it was brought there, it was different from every state.
Ah. So I might have rules here in New York, and you may have rules in South Carolina.
So believe it or not, they came there, and the time in meetings would be caused, consumed in arguing over what was correct parliamentary procedure.
Oh my goodness.
And they would never get to the work of the organization. And that's what really made him start. And he said that he doubted that they could function effectively until there was better agreement about what was correct parliamentary procedure, parliamentary laws.
Exactly. And that makes total sense. So we're at a point where he's there in San Francisco. He makes this observation, and now, what does he do next?
Well, he started to prepare a book of 16 pages of rules for the organizations that he belonged to.
All right.
And the result, they were well received, but he came to the conclusion that was the wrong idea. That was the procedure recommended by the principal book on parliamentary procedure before, at that time, Cushing. Cushing said, and Cushing said, thought that the common parliamentary law was somewhat limited to would it come down from the procedure of Parliament and Congress, and for the rest of it, or each organization should make up its own rules.
Ooh.
But he concluded that his 16 pages would only contribute further multiplicity.
Oh my goodness.
So we needed to work out one book that all organizations could adopt as their rules and follow it. That was, in a nutshell, is.
That's how it came about. Now, I remember reading that it was first, how was it first distributed? Did it go to a publisher, or how was it first distributed?
Well, they first wrote about the book is, you want to know where did you write it? And it was 1857 that it went out to San Francisco and then later to the Oregon Territory.
Okay.
But he didn't have any time to work on it until the summer of 1874 in Milwaukee, because of a very hard winter. The engineering work couldn't go on. So that's when he wrote it.
Wow.
Just 50 pages.
Amazing.
But he couldn't find a publisher that would be interested in it. Cushing and parliamentary law were synonymous, and what would an army officer know about parliamentary law? So we decided to have the president himself buy a job printer. He paid a job printer 16 pages at a time to
I love it.
print it.
So he's self-published?
Well, he, I guess he thought of publishing it, but he finally went to the principal publisher in Chicago, a man by the name of S.C. Griggs, who said to him, I'd love to publish your book. That's impressive. But I don't know where I can sell it for a copy. That's what he said. But I would enjoy meeting you. If you're ever in Chicago, drop in to see me.
All right.
The family tradition is that he took the next train for Chicago.
So be careful with invitations, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
tell you what, I'll pay for buying, you just had the sheets. I'll pay for the binding of the book.
Oh, wow.
I'll pay your whole, put up your whole investment in this publication. It'll cost you nothing. And I'll give away, I'll give away 1,000 copies to principal leaders and organizations who will use such a thing. I believe we use such a thing. And so Greg said, all right, I'll take that. And he had expected 3,000 copies that he put out for sale to last a couple of years.
Yes.
Or he would revise it from the reaction. But it was sold out in just a few months.
I mean, that's fascinating.
So they published a second edition. The first edition was published in February 19th, I think it is, 1876. And the second edition was ready in July, published in July, 16 more pages.
Amazing.
And I should say that, as I said, his book of rules, as he first drafted it, was about 50 pages. But when his wife saw it, she said, but people wanted something to tell them how to run a meeting.
Okay.
So he wrote a second part of it from his wife's influence.
Wow. Now I find, I understand that General Roberts' first and second wife had very active roles in the development and the teaching of the Roberts Rules of Order and of the manual. What were their roles?
Well, she was active in organization. His first wife. Yeah. Excuse me. His first wife was active in the organizations they walked through with him. And as I said, that was the main major contribution. So you got to have a second part telling him how to run a meeting.
Right.
Now, his second wife, when it came time to the major revision, which was published in 1915, his second wife was a former school teacher, and she served as his as his editorial assistant and secretary, sat right behind him as he worked on the book.
Yes.
For 2 years, from 1912 to 1914.
Wow. So she really influenced. And did a lot. And it worked well. Now, let's talk a little bit about your father. What was his career?
Well, he was a master teacher, as his grandfather, Joseph Thomas Rock, was. You asked about him.
Yes, I did.
He was clearly a master teacher. He studied mathematics he taught prep school after he got out of Yale. Studied for 4 years at the World Center of Mathematics at that time, Göttingen University in Germany, under David Hilbert, a world-class mathematician. And he just economics. What's that? You started to teach economics as a kid. That was his major undergraduate work at college.
And my understanding is that there's still to this day a major award that is awarded. It's called the Prize of the Naval Academy that is awarded to a midshipman of the graduating class who has completed proficiency in mathematics and study and who has accepted a commission in any branch of the Naval Service.
Yes, that is correct.
Exactly.
And that was donated by a former student of his at the summer session of Columbia studied parliamentary procedure.
Excellent, excellent. So what are your fond memories of your father?
What is that?
Fond memories of your father.
Well, he homeschooled me. Although the admiration with which he would talk about his father, and as I say, he homeschooled me until I was 7 years old.
Wow.
And was proud of the fact that he had me in the 5th reader while I was 4 years old.
Wow. Wow.
Not to blow my own horn.
Fascinating. I tell you. Now, also, you've been visiting various places throughout the country. Tell us about some of your recent trips, because you're visiting places that have significance to your family and the legacy that they have.
Well, Galveston Seawall, Galveston City, where I had the seawall. Let's see what other key ones. Of course, in Washington, he was engineer commissioner for a time. Philadelphia, Houston, Texas. Oh, I've been to various places that the NAP is. Has as I mentioned, Galveston seawall.
Nice.
Have you been to Morehouse too?
Yes, Morehouse. I've been there.
Did you? What did it feel like to walk in those hollow grounds?
Well, how does it feel like? Well, it's impressive.
Wow. And I can imagine to think that your great-grandfather was the first president. Are you visiting any other places?
Well, I have a few. I don't know that I have any connection with parliamentary procedure. He settled in the closing years of his life in his second wife's hometown, which is was also my mother's hometown of Owego, New York, not to be confused with Oswego. It's halfway between Binghamton and Elmira near the Pennsylvania border. Oswego is up on Lake Ontario, I believe.
And so we talked about fond memories of your father. What about fond memories of your mother?
Well, she was a school teacher, like his second wife. He she was asked by General Robert to be a critical reader for his other two books that he wrote later in life, Parliamentary Practice and Parliamentary Law.
Yes.
She was active in patriotic organizations.
Very good. Excellent. She had did a number of different programs, and is it true that she also sometimes substituted for him?
Oh, yes. The last year, my father from 1924 to 1932,
Yes.
he taught parliamentary procedure at Columbia University in the summer session.
Yes.
And the last year when he was transferred to economics and so on, he that was just before the opening of his, well, he had charge of an economics half of the Department of Economics and Government, and he had charge of the economics
Yes.
half of it, and he had to work and he couldn't do it. So in 1933, that last year, he sent my mother up to, because she was a former school teacher, well trained by him
Yes.
in parliamentary procedure, and so he sent her up there to substitute for him.
Excellent. Excellent. It's pretty interesting to know that. So, and it sounds like she was very successful in her own right. Is that correct?
Well, in patriotic, I work in patriotic organizations, yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So now let's just move on and talk a little bit about you, because let's talk a little bit about yourself. You have just done the Robert's Rule of Order. You're moved into the 21st century. And how does that happen?
Moving into the 21st century,
Yes.
well, the principal thing, one of the one of the biggest problems is the desire to do things electronically
Yes.
and electronic meetings. They're depending on how you do it, it's possible to work out new rules of order, but you can for electronic meetings. But some of the ways they want to do it, it's not right at all. It's not a meeting at all in the parliamentary sense.
Oh. Interesting.
Some people call them, make a distinction of synchronous and asynchronous meetings. In that connection. That's a continuing big
Yes.
That's a big continuing problem.
Well, okay. Continuing
in the
problem.
21st century.
Right. But it's interesting how you're moving it that way. Tell me, how have you kept your grandfather's legacy alive? Tell us a little bit, how are you doing that? How are you keeping it alive?
Well, by continuing to revise his book. I mean,
Exactly. And that's like powerful. What edition is this?
this is the 11th.
11th.
We're starting to work on the 12th. We're trying to work to a 10-year schedule at present.
That's what it's all about.
Yes.
It is. Well, at this point, we're going to take a pause and see if we have some questions from the audience. And I think they're getting ready to come. Well, first of all, let's all give Mr. Henry M. Robert III a hand for this fascinating interview. Thank you all for being here. Look forward to seeing this. You'll be getting emails and notices when this is going to be out of production. And I thank you all for being here. Now stay tuned for the next part of the interview. We're going to have a panel discussion with some really interesting people too. Not as interesting as our wonderful Mr. Robert, but they have lots to say. So stay right there because we're getting ready to have our second part. Thanks again, Mr. Robert.
Yes. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with this. This is a wonderful panel that we have here. We're first going to start with some introductions. Let's start right here.
Well, my name is Bert Thomas Walsh, and I serve on the officership team that revises Robert's Rules Board. With Mr. Robert.
Wonderful.
My name is Roger Hanshaw. I'm a practicing attorney from Charleston, West Virginia. I'm a professional registered parliamentarian and Republican National Committee parliamentarian.
Wonderful. And who was that?
My name's Helen McFadden. I'm from Cade, South Carolina. I'm a practicing lawyer in South Carolina and the DNC parliamentarian.
I love it. My name is Darlene T. Allen. I'm a professional registered parliamentarian and I live in Washington, D.C.
Okay, wonderful. What a fantastic commentators here. Well, first of all, what did you think about the interview? Reactions? Okay, well, I'm telling you, it was great. Well, we also have questions from the audience. And what do you think should be the highest priority for local parliamentary groups? What should be the highest priority?
Well, I'll take a shot at that. Sarah Corbin Robert, Mr. Robert's mother, used to say that the two hardest parts of Robert's Rules were the chapter on reconsider and the chapter on amendments. Now, parliamentarians love the motion to reconsider, but you don't see it much in most organizations, but you always see amendments. And I think more than any other single thing, what people ought to master is the proper formulation of amendments and the proper way to handle them in meetings, the proper way for presiding officers to state the question on amendments and to put amendments to a vote. That, I think, is the most important thing for local groups to focus on.
Exactly. That's pretty important.
I'll take a simpler approach. I think the most important thing for local groups is to use the rules of parliamentary procedure on decisions on which everyone already agrees. Because it's that process that lets people understand how the rules are supposed to work and how the process is supposed to go in a non-threatening environment. If you wait until it's a contentious time before you pull out the rule book, people feel like they've been taken advantage of or had something mysterious brought to bear, and they leave suspicious of that. If you get the organization in the habit of using the rules of order on decisions on which everybody already agrees, folks understand how it's supposed to work, and you get to have a little educational process there.
Wonderful.
And I agree with Roger. I would take one twist on that, which is something I started to do with some of the organizations I work with, and that is to get them to think of the amending process as their best opportunity to write accountability into any motion, so that they know when what they've decided to do has been properly done, has been properly completed.
Wow.
And I think I would advise you to take an even simpler approach, to not be fearful of Robert's Rules of Order and the use of parliamentary procedure. To sometimes they don't use the proper language or what others may think the proper language is, but just to start basically and get the language so that everyone knows what it is you're doing and moving from there, they can learn more and more about the proper use of parliamentary procedure by starting where they are and moving up.
Oh my goodness, that's very important there. We have a question now. Also, that's really focusing on the authorship. Over the development of Robert's Rule of Order, newly revised, what has been the significant change that has occurred in that?
Well, one of the critical things that we try to do is to apply the issue of the same principles that General Robert articulated to newly arising situations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he himself mentioned electronic meetings. Another area where we have added considerably in the most recent edition is dealing with discipline and dealing with, frankly, elected officers, how you deal with them if you aren't happy with them, if you have to remove them. Because we found, perhaps because people are more contentious today, I don't know, we get an awful lot of questions about how do we get rid of our president, how do we deal with this tyrannical chair, and how do we deal with disruptive members. So we wrote out in detail, much more in detail, appropriate due process procedures and appropriate ways to protect the rights of members, not to be, let us say, improperly dominated by their presiding officer or other officers.
Right. So, would you like to make a comment on that? Because I have a special question for you.
A special question for me?
I sure do.
I don't serve on the authorship team, so I can't speak to that, but I will say from what my own experience suggests that organizations are looking to Robert's Rules of Order as a tool now, not so much just to guide the deliberative process, but more as a tool for organization management. Where in the book can I turn to tell me how to deal with a tyrannical president? Where in the book can I turn to tell me how to deal with failure to be able to get a quorum? Where in Robert's Rules of Order can I turn for an answer to fill-in-the-blank question? And we know that that answer doesn't always exist, but that doesn't stop organizations from looking for it.
Right, that's true. That is absolutely true. So, McFadden, would you like to weigh in on that?
Well, Robert, I was going to call you Robert. Roger and I have some similar experiences, and you do find